On today's episode of The Story Detective, we're going to be talking about Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. What worked, what didn't work. And whether you're a Star Wars fan or a writer, there's going to be several things here that can be grist for your mill. That's what's coming up on today's episode. Stick around. You would have to be living in a cave not to have heard at least some of the controversy surrounding the latest Star Wars trilogy. That controversy stems from basically three different points. Either you're a diehard fan who's been with the franchise for a long time and felt that these movies didn't quite follow the rules and everything that was set up previously. Secondly, from a story point of view, things didn't quite make sense with the characters. Characterization was flawed, shall we say. It's definitely been inconsistent when it's been there at all. And thirdly, and possibly the biggest thing, is that you blame Disney for taking this over from George Lucas and not understanding the root of all this. And that was probably the biggest complaint that I've heard from most people, because we now have new people in charge and they're hiring people that weren't fans from the beginning. This is going to be mainly from the writer's point of view, but you can't help but get a little of the fan point of view in, because I'm also a fan who's watched all of the movies many times. I've been with Star Wars pretty much from the beginning. I've worked on some of the comic books when the prequels were coming out. I have a vested interest as well as a fan interest. We won't cover everything because that would be impossible in one video, but we will cover some of the chief things and hopefully give you some food for thought. There were so many books and so much of the franchise that was now ignored or defunct because of these films. And that is very disappointing for fans who've been around for a while, because all that stuff that you enjoy, all that stuff that you've already factored into the universe in your own mind, now somebody else has come in and wiped all that out. Times change. Technology changes. You only have to look at the prequels to say, okay, decades went by. Now, when you watch those prequels, and believe me, when the prequels came out, if you were there and a Star Wars fan, you know that people had problems with those prequels up until the last one. When Revenge of the Sith came out, then people sort of pieced it together and said, okay, when we're looking at this as a whole, we see that what we didn't like in the first ones kind of redeemed itself by the last one. I am a fan of the prequels. They were the part of Star Wars that I got personally involved with, so again, I have a vested interest. But as a fan, before those prequels ever came out, just like some of you, I knew what Darth Vader's story was. I had it in my head of how he transgressed into the person who was Vader, how he was supposed to be a great pilot, a great Jedi, all those things. Yet, if you watch the prequels just as a person watching those movies, if you forget all that and just watch Hayden Christensen's performance, Anakin doesn't look like he's all that great. He has skills, he has all those metachlorins going on, but at the same time he looks like an asshole from the start. From the second movie, when he first comes on, when he's not the little kid anymore, he's believing that he's a better swordsman than Yoda, that he's better than this person, better, his powers are always growing, and his arrogance just precedes him. He's whiny, he's resentful, and that was a part of his character. But if you go watch the animated series like the Clone Wars, now you're filling in all those gaps, because as a fan, when I watch the prequels, I understand that it's pieces of a huge story, and we're seeing this piece and this piece and this era, and we're skipping all those adventures and all that detail that happened in between because I'm filling it in with my mind. If I am not a fan watching those, I'm going to look at those movies completely differently. Now getting on with the sequels, you see that people who aren't fans are watching those films and they're doing sequels of the films. How much time and effort they put into actually researching that, understanding what the fans want, understanding what Star Wars is about beyond the films, well, that's anybody's guess. But I think by hiring Chris Terrio, who was at least a Star Wars fan, they got some of the heart back. Looking at this as a film, the ideas that they had going in and writing something for a movie studio, especially one as large as Disney, there's going to be changes. Those changes are always going to seem arbitrary to the fans. They are made by choice of statistics. If Disney as a company has done X amount of movies, and they've done a lot, and those movies did better at the box office by adding XYZ elements to those films, they're going to come at Star Wars and say, where's X? Where's Y? Where's Z? Even if those elements don't fit. It's something that Disney would not only do, but any big studio would do. And yet it does work. You've seen successful movies and you've seen bad movies. What they've done putting this together and looking at those statistics and understanding even some small part of them kind of goes something like, I read your script, kid, and it's fabulous, just fabulous. It's just missing a couple of minor points like pets. People love pets. Pet lovers come to movies. A pet. They're spending a lot of time on a foresty planet. What kind of a... We could give Ray a pet lizard like an iguana. Lizards were last year, kid. Don't you pay attention to anything? People want cute and fluffy, furry, cuddly creatures. Something that every grandma can give their grandchild. We want plush toys. Think marketing. Cute, cuddly, Star Wars. We could bring the Ewoks back. Ewoks. Yes, that's brilliant. But we also have to figure in the danger. I mean, this is part 3. The danger has to be gigantic. Like those cannons that blew up planets. What if every ship was equipped with one of those and the Emperor had an entire fleet of planet-destroying spaceships? Yes, but the Death Star, that was the size of a small moon, and the technology had to be fitted into an entire planet to draw power from the sun. That's a lot of energy. Jesus, kid, technology is getting smaller every day. Smaller, thinner. That's what's in. You mean to tell me they can't fit what used to fit on a moon inside one of those ships? I mean, the ships are pretty big, you know? And you have to remember what we're paying you to do this project. You have to deliver. Paying me? Shit. Times 12. Carry the 6. I can't afford to lose this project. Well, all right then. You're the boss. So what did I think? What did I expect from this final film? Again, we need to look at the first 2 movies to consider a few things, at least from my point of view, and I'll give that to you for what it's worth. We get to The Force Awakens. Now, Rey and Kylo Ren as characters were lacking from the beginning. There were some points in there. They weren't terrible characters. And they still had 2 films to go, so there was a lot of character development still to happen. I had questions coming out of it. I had to think about it for a while, especially the way Rey developed the whole Force mentality. It seemed like, from a lot of people that I talked to, that this just did awaken literally in her mind that she was better than Luke, she was better than Anakin. She didn't have to go through any training. And after I thought about this for a while, the connection she had with Kylo Ren, she knew what he knew because she had his memories just as he had her memories. This was even talked about in one of the comic books. There was a scene that explained that very clearly. And yet, when I talk to people about this, they kind of give me wispy looks and they're like, no. It is what it is. That's what they intended, whether you want to buy it or not. Now, I'm not saying that this is logical or makes sense within the Star Wars universe with everything that came before. She did know what he knew. That's how she picked up on the training. She still should have been doing some kind of training, which we didn't really see. As a villain, and if you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I am a big fan of villains. If you have a bad villain, your story is going to be lacking. And it didn't look like Kylo Ren was the big bad from the beginning to me. Of course, we had Snoke. And he looked like he was going to be the person behind all this. Kylo Ren was a Vader wannabe. Every decision that he made within the first film and the second one was not made out of logic or strategy. It was made out of anger. He was not a person who would be what I would consider a good warrior or a good fighter. Good fighters have discipline. They have control. And it was obvious from the beginning that Kylo Ren had neither of these things. So when Rey knew what he knew and she bested him quickly, she was somebody who had at least a little bit more logic and a bit more control. You give two warriors the same logic, the same exact training, the way they deal with it is going to be very different. One is going to be a little bit smarter. One's not going to be as smart. If you know anything about martial arts or you've studied any of this even at a glance, you know that this guy is going to be sloppy. He's going to let his emotions get the better of him, and that's going to be his downfall in a fight. So when Rey kind of bested him in the end, I was not at all surprised. To me, that wasn't the worst part of it. People had a lot of problems with it, but I grasped it enough to say, okay, let's at least give them a chance and see where they're going with it. It was also good to see the old cast, the old crew, old friends getting back together again. And Han Solo dying, it was not the worst death of any of the trilogy that they put together. It was meaningful. This was his son. There was a certain logic as a parent to coming to him the way that Han did. I was not, again, completely annoyed over that one. Then we come to The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi was a major cutoff point for a lot of fans, and much of that had to do with their portrayal of Luke. Luke was not the Luke we remembered. While as a writer, I understand you should put your characters through hell. You should put them through dark times. Even Luke Skywalker should face doubts and darkness. There's things that he needs to overcome. It's understandable that with what happened with Kylo Ren, that he would have some guilt. He would have some things to overcome. But he's trashing everything, all the years and all the knowledge over this one mistake. Should he have been fixing it? Should he have been doing something different rather than just giving up? Again, we're back to character development. And when the character development doesn't ring true, that's when the fans or your audience start disconnecting. If you have someone who's been through as much as Luke Skywalker, and then to have them give up for reasons that seem questionable, that's not good character motivation, and I'm sorry, but that's not good storytelling either. So let's look at Kylo Ren. He kills Snoke in this one. Who we thought was the big bad in Snoke is now easily taken out by Kylo Ren. He's not quite as bad as we thought he was going to be. So the question then is Kylo stepping up to becoming the big bad? Well, what we see in the final and I think best moment of Luke in the film is when he's there in his astral projection form and he's baiting Kylo. He's doing exactly what a smart warrior does to an angry, emotional one. And that's leading them to do what you want them to do because they're going to get all wrapped up in their emotions and become predictable. And Kylo follows just as he always did. His anger takes over and he's still a child. He's not looking like the big bad, and he's certainly not looking like a good villain. He's looking like a conflicted character at best. So again, the story is missing the villain. Without the villain, this is the other half of your story. And so far we've gone through 2 films and we don't actually have a major villain. What we saw in Snoke is not characterized at all, so even if we thought he was the major villain, we know nothing about him up to this point. And with Kylo Ren, you're more just either liking him because he's a conflicted character and hoping he gets over it, or hoping he gets his ass kicked because of what he did to his father, who was one of the major characters from the franchise in the beginning. You either want to see Kylo getting taken down or you want to see him somehow redeem himself, but you don't see him as the villain. You don't see him as the other half of the story. The only thing that's making him the other half of this duo is that connection with Rey. Let's talk about Rey. When you're talking about Rey, you're talking about the heart of this story. Although sometimes Rey seems like a passenger instead of the vehicle. Granted, they have a lot of characters in this and a lot of loose ends to tie up. Old characters, new characters, there's a lot going on. So this is not an easy project by any means. However, let's try to summarize what we do know about Rey. Technology. She's very good with that. We see her in the Millennium Falcon. We see her finding pieces in old ships and wreckages. She's educated herself in how these things work. And at the same time, there's definitely an intuitive nature that comes with her Force awareness. She's also kind of drawn to the dark side. There's that part of her that the dark side is calling out to. Granted, it's her choice whether or not to go to the dark side, just as it's the choice of every Jedi before her. And they've said all along that the dark side has its allure, and yet it's calling out to her. That scene where she goes into the cave and sees herself when she's asking about parents, this was also something that I thought was very relevant. It seems like she didn't actually have parents, because she's asking to see her parents, and what she sees is herself. There's no one beyond that. So my impression from this is all of these things is Anakin. Anakin had the technological know-how, the Force awareness. He was also drawn to the dark side. Going into The Rise of Skywalker, I assumed that there was a connection between Anakin and Rey. After all, Star Wars as a whole is all about Anakin/Vader. The two things that I thought this movie needed to touch on was A, all of the Jedis who became one with the Force, who went on to that place where they would supposedly be more powerful than ever, and we need to tie something back to Anakin. So much of what they're doing has been what he set in motion. So I'm thinking maybe Rey is Anakin's daughter. Maybe the Emperor has clones of Anakin. I thought there could be a clone of Anakin, but from a writer's standpoint, if you bring back Anakin or Darth Vader, that's also a story that's already been told. And the newer writers are not going to want to retell a story that's been told already, or go through all that again, because then what do? Redeem Anakin all over again? So my thinking is, if Anakin has returned, he has to be some type of clone that his humanity has been weeded out, and now he's just the Emperor's killing machine, or everything that he wanted Anakin to be, a heartless, soulless robot. My number two thought is that he tried to experiment, and we see that the Emperor has a lab where he's doing things. There's even a deformed image of Snoke in one of the chambers, and he's keeping himself alive through all of these unnatural methods. So I thought, why not, if he has some type of DNA from Anakin, and why not? I mean, he's the guy that pretty much did the surgery after he was burnt up and put the suit on him and did all this stuff to rebuild him. He could easily have samples of his DNA. So my thinking was, Rey is some sort of byproduct of that DNA. That's why she's clicking all these points that are so much like Anakin, because she is a part of Anakin. Now this in my mind would have made it a better story. It would have clicked on some level where she's actually related to Luke and Leia.